Thanks for coming by. I know that we're up against a cocktail hour, so it's a real delight to see so many of you here to hear about the FHIR Accelerator program. It's been a remarkable ascent to where we've gotten today. I think a lot of it is attributable to the colleague to my immediate left, Vinci Project, who in the fall of 2014 announced the outcome of the JSON project, in which he described open APIs as the future of interoperability. And today, because of some of Mickey's remarkable insight, 20 years ago,
20
Mickey?
years ago.
Yeah, 10 years ago. Oh, wait, I need that on video. We'll hear from all of the accelerators this evening to talk about some of the innovation that they've been able to achieve during the last calendar year, as well as the future for each of the accelerators. So first, let me turn it over to Vinci Project for comments about the origins of the FHIR Accelerator program.
Great. Thanks so much, Chuck. It's really just so heartwarming to look at this really crowded stage of FHIR accelerators, because just going back to, when we started, all of this, it was really coming out of, as Chuck said, a task force report that we had written as a part of the Standards Committee and the Policy Committee back then that quickly led to a group of organizations, technology developers, provider organizations, HL7, and others getting together and formulating the idea that if we are going to move forward with API-based exchange, and in particular, if the federal government, in particular ONC, was going to put this into regulation, there was this idea that we needed the private sector to get together to rapidly mature what would be a FHIR-based API so that we could get it ready to the point that it actually could be instantiated in regulation in a way that would be scalable and feasible and all of those things. And so that was the beginnings of this, the Argonaut Project. And one of the things we focused on was a very specific use case, which was how do we define a FHIR API that would support the US CDI data elements. It was very narrow, focused. Let's do this as a sprint, get together a group of organizations, a coalition of the willing who are willing to put in a little bit of money, get a project launched, and then get that done. And the original, sort of mandate, as it were, was just that. It's like, let's just get that done, and then we'll disband and we'll go off and do our regular day jobs. And what ended up happening was we delivered that implementation guide. It got picked up by ONC, obviously, eventually, but it got picked up by Apple to be the core of the Apple Health Record. And Apple became our primary testing platform and diffusion agent for the Argonaut implementation guide. And one of the things that came out of that, though, being a successful deliverable, was we started reflecting on, and this is with Chuck, the Argonaut project members and others, started reflecting on the value of sort of the platform, the organization and network and collaboration platform that we had created. And said, you know what, this is actually a really useful vehicle for us to think about other FHIR use cases, where we can just roll up our sleeves, get a bunch of engineers together, agree on a, sort of a discrete, relatively focused, achievable set of deliverables that could actually be sort of informed by live testing by those organizations. So you're not doing it, sort of in a later environment, in a later connectathon environment and having these long cycles. While you're still writing the implementation guide, let's get live testing, let's get sort of discrete artifacts out to market, and then let's sort of keep proceeding. So Argonaut started off with really just that original thought of just getting one implementation guide out, turned into this is a great collaboration vehicle, and then we started thinking about and started getting approached by other organizations who were saying, we're a group of payers, we're a group of other stakeholders, and maybe we should just, sort of, can we join Argonaut? And at that point, again, a number of us started thinking, one of the things that was important about Argonaut, and we think contributed to its success, was the focus that we had, was the ability to say, this is a group of vendors, EHR vendors and provider organizations who had a real focus on provider-focused use cases, and payer-provider a little bit, but provider-focused use cases. And maybe that's the beauty of it, that we're not getting diffused, not sort of having all sorts of other competing interests, that we're sort of sticking to what these organizations were sort of best at. So anyway, fast forward, that led to the spawning of different communities coming forward and saying there's a FHIR Accelerator that's got those focuses as well. And I just really, as I said, couldn't be happier with the way that that's really sort of flowered and blossomed. So I don't know what I'm doing here. Are we just handing it down, or okay?
So that night, when Mickey created the Argonaut Project, in all fairness, it was something that we really had no understanding what it would become. When I made an announcement in January, a couple weeks later, everyone looked at me and said, "You don't expect me to believe that Epic and Cerner are actually going to talk to one another." And now they work together in Argonaut on a daily basis. One of the leaders in that initial Argonaut project was Anish Chopra, who's going to talk about some of the accomplishments of Argonaut from 2023 and the future plans for the coming year and beyond. So, Anish?
Thank you, Chuck and Mickey. We have a large group, so we're going to do this as briefly as I can. In the ethos of working together on shared interests, what's become the norm is an anticipation of the next wave of US CDI rulemaking. Argonaut has almost taken on the responsibility of being the yin and the yang to the US CDI process. And so if you have comments, questions, feedback about what did the administration mean by expressing, social needs, information in US CDI v3? Well, we would wrangle with that and make some judgments, and it turns out we came up with some mechanisms to make sure that the execution of that would be consistent across all of the EHRs. In that particular example, we reached consensus last year on the use of FHIR observations to facilitate the sharing of social needs conclusions. But we also branched into other areas that were obvious. Patient access brands may not be like the hottest knife through butter cool use case in FHIR, but it became critical because it was very hard to figure out which provider groups had which FHIR endpoints that could be discovered in a very public and transparent way. Many of you know that in Apple, they have a registration process. So in the Apple app, you could see, but that didn't really apply universally. So we've kind of socialized the idea of allowing individual organizations to map their FHIR endpoint to their organization. And that is now a FHIR patient access brand API. We accomplished that in 2023. Mickey, there is some rulemaking around this in your HTI1 and maybe some cleanup in IL2 and HTI2, but we're going to figure out how to do all that. So that was sort of 2023. Probably the more important topics are where do you want to engage in 2024? And so I think this is an area where we're crossing the chasm into the world of FHIR right. Carefully, quietly, deliberately, without causing undue harm to the ecosystem. So what we're starting is something is really simple. I think it's blood pressure and glucose results, so we can be very consistent. If there's a wearable and you want to bring that particular piece of discrete data in, consumer-generated or clinician-generated, into the EHR. That's the scope of FHIR right. I believe blood glucose is the winner of the initial goal, and we'll try to build off of that. And then, drum roll please, bulk optimize. Oh yes, we're optimizing bulk FHIR in the Argonaut project. To be very honest, I have no idea what the scope of work is on bulk optimize. All I've been told is it's going to be faster. It's going to allow for filtering on request, so you can say, just get me the blood pressure reading for HEDIS. Where's my NCQA peoples? Right, for you, Amol. They did this for you. Okay? And then last but certainly not least, the opportunity to make sure that it actually works across other use cases. And so we heard from the VA. We're having a listening session with the CDC. So we'll try to figure out a way to clean up on aisle 3, bulk optimize. So Chuck, that's us.
Yeah, I think the filter idea is really unique, and I think it'll change a lot of people's view of bulk FHIR. So our next spokesperson is going to be Ryan Howells from the CARIN Alliance, who really made a difference in patient-to-provider access. So Ryan, why don't you talk about your successes from last year and the direction for the coming years?
Thanks, Chuck. So CARIN Alliance is getting individual patients and their caregivers more digital access to their healthcare data. We were one of the OGs, what are we called? Accelerators. It's late in the day. With Vinci and with Argonaut. So the goal is, what's interesting is that not only are we increasing the ability for patients to access their data, but we have the largest community of in-production FHIR experience of anyone in the country right now. We have 30 apps that have connected to FHIR APIs in production, and they know more about what's happening in the FHIR ecosystem than I think almost anybody across the board. Now, I'm not throwing anybody under my bus. I love all these people on the stage. That is really exciting because we can help with what needs to be fixed. For example, on one of the projects we were working on is related to a framework for an API directory. One of the challenges that we have is that just because you publish your endpoint doesn't mean you can talk to the technical person that can help you when the endpoint doesn't work. So getting the client OAuth secret is really hard. So folks like Jason Teeple, who's trying to find API endpoints for the thousands of providers that he has, is going to be helped by what Mickey is doing from a Tefka perspective to publish the endpoint directory. But what needs to be in it? What needs to be shown? What information do we need to show beyond the capability statements to actually find ways where that endpoint could be connected in a meaningful way? So we've done some work on that. We've published it on the HL7 site. We're excited about it. We have 3 different APIs that we've worked with. One is Blue Button, which I'm sure you guys have heard. The VA has implemented it. CMS has implemented it, which we're really excited about. Multiple payers have implemented it. Now with the CMS rule, we have Provider Access API, which allows for providers to get access to that Blue Button data without the financials. We're still working on kind of the details around what that's going to look like, but essentially net out the financial information so that can be shared, which is great. We've also worked on a digital insurance card project where we have an API related to digital insurance card that allows for individuals to take their paper insurance card and put it in a digital format into an app of their choice. We had a really interesting project last year where we brought Apple, Google, and Samsung together in the same room with Epic and a few others and said, what would it actually look like if we could actually upload not only the digital insurance card, but then be able to take that information and share it, again, digitally without scanning it, upload it to another third-party application. What does that look like? There's standards that are outside of HL7, sorry, Chuck, but like, for example, MDocs, that allows for that to happen. So how do we figure out ways for that to occur? And how do we upload that information into another mobile wallet, taken from the mobile wallet and upload it to an application? We've done some work on that and again and published that for folks to have. We've got a set of API best practices for how to publish the API, which is also on our website to make that occur. We did some work on the CARIN Code of Conduct. So folks that know, this is a code of conduct for apps that are not covered by HIPAA that has been adopted by hundreds of payers and providers across the country for how to handle data that's outside of the HIPAA protected environment. The value in that now is that we have this new area. It's not just HIPAA and it's not just FTC. It's a new protected area, thanks to Tefka, where we can have Tefka CARIN protected apps. What do I mean by that? It means that those apps who volunteer to be IAS-related apps in Tefka need to also be able to follow HIPAA privacy and security rules, and they're also attesting to the CARIN Code of Conduct, which means that the apps that are in this Tefka CARIN environment protect the information and allow for you to have more consent over your data than any other app in the ecosystem. Those are the good apps. Those are the ones that we want to have opportunities to be able to exchange our data with so that that can happen at scale. And that is now a voluntary environment that's in the FTC space that it now allows that to occur thanks to Tefka and thanks to the work that we've done on the Code of Conduct, because they're now built into the Tefka standard operating procedures. A lot of the work that we've done in the CARIN Code of Conduct was actually built into that Tefka SOP. This year, I'll go really quick. This is the year of FHIR pilot collaboration, right? I don't have a cool name like Anish does, but related to optimization. But the ability for us to optimize this. So what are we thinking about that? One is real-time pharmacy benefit check. It's actually been an API we've had out there for quite some time. There are now 7 states across the country that require consumers to get access to their real-time pharmacy benefit information. California and Texas require an API for that to happen. We have actually now have PBMs that have implemented that in production based on the work that we did with HL7, and we expect more states and more PBMs to continue that work, and we're working with folks on what that looks like. There's a 50 to 75% cost savings for patients when they actually use that API into production. The second thing is we're working with Da Vinci on prior auth pilots in terms of how this looks from a patient perspective. We haven't quite figured out how patients are going to get access to their prior auth information yet, even though it's in the rule. We're working very hardly on making that happen. And then the final thing I'd say is we're also working on digital identity pilots. So we've had a few conversations about this. If you've heard us speak before, you'll hear us speak about the importance of digital identity. We believe that every provider and patient in the country needs to have their own digital identity credential for this to actually work at scale. That is an IL2 certified credential that allows for you to be able to take that own credential and then to be able to use that as the single sign-on for healthcare across multiple different portals. The VA has one with ID.me, obviously related to that. You can get one on LinkedIn. You can get one when you file your taxes with the IRS. They're free and openly available. 85 million Americans have one. We want to have all of Americans to be able to get one. This allows for an individual, again, either patient or provider, to authenticate themselves once and never have to do it again. Think of it as a login with type situation. We believe that's critical for getting the FHIR ecosystem to work at scale, where we can tie it back to the individual identity of either the patient or the provider themselves. That's how we think we can get this to scale, along with obviously a common API directory that obviously Mickey's helping with and others too.
Stop stealing my thunder.
All right, sorry. I know Fast is helping us with this, Da Vinci's helping us with this, and I'm going to shut up now. So that's what we are doing.
Okay, Ryan, you managed to get just under 20 minutes, so thank you. So 5 years ago or so, HL7 brought together a group of people under the rubric of partners in interoperability. And in the room, we brought payers and providers. And they said they'll kill one another. And instead, what emerged is the Da Vinci Project, and Jocelyn Keegan is going to talk to us now about some of the accomplishments of the evolution of Da Vinci and where it's headed. Jocelyn?
Awesome. So we have 15 use cases, and for the spirit of today's event, I am not going to talk about all 15 of them because you guys would be dizzied and asleep by the time I finished. So Da Vinci did start. We're actually in our 6th year, which is kind of crazy. And I would say that, like Ryan and Anish, we're a little bit like the big sister, I guess, of the accelerator program. And because we had payers at the table, we actually required, I'd say, more formality and structure than maybe some of our predecessors. And we were able to convene payers, providers, the vendors that support both sides of those folks. And it was really remarkable. And I just want to make one comment I think that's really important about why the accelerator program has been so successful. And when I talk to members and community members that are involved in the project, is really this sense of community. So we have sort of 4 main categories that we're working in space-wise. So we have coverage, burden reduction, and transparency. And so that's where prior authorization, price cost transparency, things like a simplified sort of shopping formulary that isn't the real-time benefit check stuff that Ryan does. We've got a set of use cases around bidirectional data exchange that are really about getting the semantics and the workflow right for use case specific exchange of data between payers and providers. So there's a way for providers to send data to payers and a way for payers to send data back to providers. We also use that same API, as you've heard Ryan talk about, under patient access API. It's now tied into provider access API, and there's some supporter APIs that go along with that so that you can holistically get all of the information you need about a patient to the patient, the provider, or the next payer that's going to use them, and the payload of information like their previous prior authorizations to really remove friction and burden off of patients and providers when somebody decides to change plans. The third category is really around sort of risk and quality, and so we work closely with the folks at NCQA as part of our founding partners to make sure that we have a way for people to get to the nirvana of how do we attest to quality and collect information about quality happening in workflow, and how do you alert somebody about a care gap. And that's actually one of our most mature use cases. It's actually the use case that I got involved in Da Vinci on because it was literally doing med reconciliation was the first use case. And that grew into this framework around being able to alert and notify people. It's actually gone to an STU4, which is really important because it means that it's got wide adoption and it has been tested thoroughly and continues to mature. It's actually the first one that's going to go to the latest version of US CDI. And it's part of this community of APIs that you'll need really to be able to move to FHIR and quality, which is really exciting. And then we have the similar set of APIs for risk adjustment, which again, when you're really talking about moving people to value-based care between payers and providers, it's critically important that the clinical data that's needed for proof and to get the outcomes you want is repeatable and scalable. For anybody that heard Anish sort of hold court today, you know, this idea about making data available when it's available, just the right amount of data between trusted partners is critically important. And then the fourth area is sort of these like helper implementation guides. And I'm going to just stop for a second. We have a use case which really has come to fruition over the last year, which is value-based performance reporting. And this is actually allowing people to share data at the population level about where they are in a contract period between a payer and a provider. And we were able to mature that to an STU2 over this past year, which is sort of the second level of maturity. And I'm just going to pause for a second. When we look at sort of the class of all of the implementation guides we're working on, what's important is that we've gotten them pretty much, the ones that are mature and have been available for a while, to a point where they're usable, that people have them in pre-production and production environments. We're starting to see some amazing, like stupid, simple proof points of 200% and 300% improvements in sort of employee workflow, turnaround times of getting people things prior auth. I mean, it's really showing the power and the reusability of these implementation guides. So the last fourth category is sort of more of a utility. So we have an attribution API that allows you to basically share a member list. That's really important when you start thinking about things like bulk and being able to do things at a population level. We continue, the work of Da Vinci is to build implementation guides, build test scripts, and to build reference implementations to support those and to support the implementation community. Increasingly, I'd say we've been talking sort of for the last 2 or 3 years about this is going to be the year of implementation. Last year was amazing. Like literally coming out of the pandemic, we really saw providers, the vendor community, and the payer community. If they haven't publicly talked about what they accomplished last year, they will likely be talking about it over the course of today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, and definitely be crowing at hymns about the proof points that we've gotten. It's really been remarkable. And this year, as you heard, if you were here earlier for one of the other panels, we're really focused on how do we leverage the investment in TEFCA to really get that trusted framework so that we can take these initial APIs that payers and providers have been using point to point and start to scale them with the QHINs becoming a reality and TEFCA coming to action. Super excited. We have one new use case that I would probably be remiss if I didn't talk about it, and that is we're actually doing our first, I'd say, financial adjacent use case, and we're actually doing a postable remittance use case, which is basically helping people that are the secondary payee. So as more and more people care for a patient, it allows people to retrieve, when they get a deposit in their bank account, it actually allows them to track down. And the reason I mention it today is it's a really small fit for purpose implementation guide that is solving a huge pain point and a financial hardship for people like our, pharmacy-based health systems, right, that are being put to use that, people basically can't track down their money once it's been paid by the payers. And so a really good example of how you take FHIR as a utility and use it to fill in the gaps between the existing standards. Super excited for this year, and I'm going to hand it off.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Our next speaker, Chi Lee, is going to talk about the Vulcan project. Vulcan began as a really ambitious program around oncology patient care and research and has evolved into a much broader landscape. Let me turn it over to Chi and talk about the future of Vulcan. Thanks, Chi.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. So so today, I think in this conference you hear a lot about provider, payer, but how about really around the clinical research, the pharmaceutical companies and the regulatory agencies, and that's a very important stakeholder in our entire healthcare ecosystem. And the new drugs are being invented. We have a lot of debates about it, so on and so forth. But there's a tremendous power of the data to help really streamline the clinical research process. So Vulcan was created, launched in 2020. And it was really by the regulatory agencies like FDA, EMA, and healthcare institutions and global standard bodies as well. And in 2023 has been really focusing on several implementation guides. And these guides are really centered around the challenges with clinical research. Real-world data is a key area. When you think about a retrospective analysis, you want to get 2,000 patients with certain conditions. You need to collect data from, let's say, 10 different healthcare institutions. Would it be nice if there's a standard way to get those data, right? This is where FHIR API is tremendously very powerful. And schedule of activity is another one very interesting. When you conduct clinical trials, you don't do it at one hospital. You do it at 20 or sometimes more. And in this case, all these activities around, for example, there are 20 scheduled visits at visit number 1, visit number 2, and these are the data you need to collect. These are the medication that you want to be given, and all these informations could be standardized also using FHIR API. So this ability to use the FHIR standards to help standardize all these critical clinical trial information so can collect data automatically, integrate with EHR more intuitively. These are very important. So in 2023, we published these implementation guides. And also we piloted the electronic product information, and which is very popular in Europe. As you go between different countries, you want the same medication, you want the same labels and same information, regardless which country that you're at. So all this has been very, very useful. And last year, we conducted our first Euro Vulcan that was in Paris, and they loved to pick the nice locations, and so very good participations, and with 80 different participants, and so that was very helpful, and really to bring also activities in Europe as well. And last year, also very exciting, is we added 9 new members, including the NIH research organization, and also several large oncology centers, and really participate in this global consortium. So now the total member is 45 as of last year, so that was exciting. And we also, because the expertise on the committee, including pharma companies and healthcare institutions and standard really bodies, we contribute to 4 RFIs from FDA, which is very important stakeholders, about how to use data to support clinical research as well. This year, our goal is to do additional implementation guides around adverse events, and also around the phenotyping more effectively using EHR data. This is very important when you define the cohorts very carefully. But more importantly is actually around the pilot this year. So we define all these implementation guides. If nobody's using it, that'll be challenging. So really call to action for anybody here is really if there's interest in using the Vulcan APIs and to support clinical research process, please participate. So that's it for me.
Thanks, Che. So I conflated in my vision here for the future of collaboration the origins of CodeX, which actually began as a MITRE project and expanded dramatically to include not only cancer care and research, but cardiology and genomics. So let me turn the mic over to Wanmei Oh, and she'll talk about where CodeX will venture next. So Wanmei?
Sounds good, thank you. So I thought that I were the youngest kid in the block for the accelerator. Apparently I'm not, at least CodeX was founded 2019, so a couple months older than your baby. So yes, so like Chuck said, right, CodeX is start with oncology, and the goal is the high-level goal is to be able to develop a clinical specialty implementation guide for FHIR to foster the adoptions for all the clinical specialty care. So we started with oncology, and we leveraged the MCO, which stands for Minimum Common Oncology Data Element, and we documented a IG and put it into the community, and also bring it in the community, convene the community to implement that. So since then, the oncology side, we also expand into cardiology, genomics reporting, as well as radiology. So you can find all 4 IGs on the HL7 CodeX website. So what we have done last year, I'm going to go pretty brief because Jason is another person to speak. So last year, CodeX has 7 use cases in progress, 3 in planning, and I'm going to just highlight 2 of the use cases. The first one is about leveraging 8 data elements, structured data elements from MCO, to assess whether we can improve clinical trial matching, especially in the community-based care. Because as all of you know that clinical trials today tend to be enrolled in academic medical centers that are in major US cities, and a lot of rural patients in the rural area will not be able to benefit, right, with this intervention. So we have done a retrospective study and confirmed that with these 8 data elements in MCO, we are able to improve the availability of the clinical trial to patients that within 20-mile distance access by between 50 to 80%, depending on the cancer type. So that is a very exciting accomplishment, and we are also working on a prospective study that is extend beyond the current scope and go into another state where the rural care is very much needed. So we will see. We will collect about 12 to 1,500 patients to prove upon this. The second use case I want to highlight is the genomic reporting IG, where is to describe how to transport data from the genomic laboratory, like Foundation Medicine, Tempus, right? They do genomic testing. We really want those information in real time integrate with EHR. So we have also completed a production delivery of these implementation IG and implement that across 50 plus US oncology network, serving about 2,500 physicians and about 1.5 million patients annually. So we get it working and implemented. It's not easy. It's still a lot of negotiation with vendors like Tempus and Foundation, but we nailed it. I think that is really good for the patient to incorporate those structured data into the clinical trial, clinical decision support. So what we're going to do next year. So next year, we will very much focus on the alignments with the policy side. And thanks to Anish last year, that trying to convince, working with the Cancer Moonshot, and convince a number of EHR vendors to pledge to support the MCO FHIR standard in terms of submitting the CMS, EOM, quality measure, which stands for the Enhanced Oncology Model. It is a value-based risk-sharing agreement between the oncology practice and CMS. And I would say convening may be a nice term, maybe dragging is probably more realistic. So, but thank you. Yes. So yes. So my organization, Ontata, along with Epic and Cerner, and as well as Flatiron, that agreed to and Meditech. Okay, it's new, and to support this submission this October. So thank you, Anish. Last piece is that we're also looking into is for the clinical trial inclusion-exclusion criteria. Today, they are written very much in an unstructured form. We want to see that is, can we also develop some standard around it so that we can execute this inclusion-exclusion criteria more seamlessly instead of have to spend a lot of efforts to decipher those information. With that said, the whole goal of CodeX is go beyond cancer, definitely go into cardiology, genomic reporting. We want to learn from every single patient and then really achieve that learning health system. Thank you.
Thanks, Wan Mei. So our last speaker is from FAST. FAST began as an internal ONC project about infrastructure for fire enablement. And it was handed off to HL7 and formally became a FHIR Accelerator as a program under the FAST rubric. So Jason Teeple is going to talk to us about how that's progressed and what their aspirations are in the coming year. Jason?
Thanks, Chuck. So I'm glad I got to go last because it made my job so much easier, because if I just stand out here and we look back over at everyone else at the table here, I'm accelerating what they're doing, right? The challenge that we have with FHIR today is that we can connect point to point, but when you start looking across the community, we have to start thinking forward. How do we connect multiple payers, multiple providers? And that's what FAST is essentially trying to do, is scale the infrastructure behind all these great accelerators. So first step around all this is just looking at National Directory. I think that's a core piece. That's something Mickey's been focused on for the last few years, and that's something that we worked on the last year and probably continue into the future. How do we take that National Directory, find the endpoints, find the information that Ryan was talking about during his presentation here. Another piece that's also core is security. That's a kind of like a hidden piece within all the implementation guides. If you look at the drop-down, security is kind of mentioned there, but it's not talked about in scale. Security right now is point to point. We need security at a large national scale, and that's where UDAP comes in. So UDAP, Unified Data Access Profile, and hopefully I have that right. It allows us to have that kind of single stream of ability to access as one app into another payer or payer to payer, so you don't have to go out and do all that manual registration. So as long as we have that unified concept together, which I think Tough Guy includes in there, which is awesome. That's a great first step for us to be able to scale these connectivities. Another piece is consent, something Ryan's been working on, but how do you scale the consent? So once we start moving data and we start having the member involved, and you have member data coming from the payer, how do you make sure that the consent follows that member across along with their data? So that's a key piece that's happening. Another interesting piece is testing. How do we make sure we're testing across these IGs, and how do we make sure our infrastructure, the boring piece behind the scenes that business doesn't like to hear about, but how do we make sure that the data is, the services are being tested consistently? Never heard of it.
You never heard of Inferno?
No. But how do we make sure we're testing it consistently across all these FHIR servers and endpoints? And finally, I think where we're trying to head is making sure that we're supporting where I think Tefka wants to go, is scaling that connectivity across the ecosystem. So making sure that we're looking forward to where all the connection problems are, and being kind of the convener of all those implementation guides and making sure that we understand where their challenges are, and tackling those implementation guides holistically. So 45 seconds, Ryan.
Wow, that was good. So before we close up, I just want to mention, if you see on the screen, all of the training programs that are going on the next month. Remarkably, we're going to be giving training programs in, let me get it, what?
Hindi.
Mandarin, Hindi, Spanish, and English in the next month. So it's remarkable. And so I'd like to have everyone applaud my colleague Diego Kaminker, who's so responsible for some of this training. Lastly, I'd like to open it up to any questions from the audience about the FHIR accelerators, where we're going, collaboration amongst the accelerators, and the future of the FHIR program. I think we'll have an announcement in May about the 9th accelerator, so look forward to that. But let me open it up to the floor. I started at 4 a.m. this morning with a call to Europe, so I can appreciate that you're all wound down. So
There's food right over there.
oh, and there's food there. So if you're still awake enough, you can wander over to the food. Thanks for coming. Thanks to all these incredible panelists and for the work they've done and will continue to do in the coming year. And thanks to Mickey for his leadership. Have a good evening.